Welcome. I'm Heather Tinsley-Fix, Senior Advisor at AARP. AARP's mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age, and after the age of 50, that increasingly includes work. And when we talk about work, the conversation pretty quickly moves into talking about skills. That's why we're holding this series of fireside chats on the future of skills. So much is changing right now in the world of work, and the shift toward a skills-based labor market is a big one, and it affects workers of all ages. I'm here today with Ben Eubanks, researcher, author, podcaster, and speaker. Ben is a principal at Lighthouse Advisory, and his best-selling book, Artificial Intelligence for HR, is slated for a second edition. Ben is also the host of the podcast, We're Only Human, and a sought-after speaker on all things HR. Ben, thank you for joining me.
Hey, Heather, I'm so glad to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yep, me too. So let's go ahead and just kick things off. For a long time, we've heard about the war on talent. That was kind of a theme for a long time in all the conferences that you and I have been to. But now it's starting to shift, and the conversation is more about the war on skills. So I was wondering if you could sort of talk a little bit about how skills are kind of the new business currency.
Absolutely. So more and more I'm talking to employers, and they're not just talking about, well, we have this job to fill, but they're increasingly talking about, we have these specific skill gaps within our organization. We're trying to fill, we're trying to figure out how to fix that issue. And that comes out right in terms of how that's identified and how to solve for that. So again, we'll probably dive into that today, but that comes out in a couple different ways. For example, we see in our learning and development team that these kinds of content are a critical gap. We don't have anything here to fill that need. Or on the recruiting side, we're trying to find these types of skills because we don't have those inside the business. So there's lots of different ways to break that down. I'm a bit of a science nerd, right? You said I was a researcher up front, and I'll just admit that here. When we think about matter, atoms are the smallest form of any element. And in terms of the work that gets done, skills are the smallest form of how those things get accomplished. And increasingly, it's becoming a currency for employers. A lot of companies struggle with that, but I think if you can solve for that piece, and hopefully I'll be able to give you some tips and suggestions, some stories today as how people are solving for that and tackling that issue, I think it's going to allow you to really not just take care of your people, but serve your customers better long term.
We need this skill this year, or we think we're going to need this skill next year. In fact, it's got to be more of a competency in identifying the needs for your business.
Yes, absolutely. And it's different. What's interesting is we think, a nurse is a nurse, and we just assume that all nurses are the same. But last year, very early on in the pandemic, I spent some time with a company that does labor market intelligence. And they could actually tell you, okay, a nurse in Atlanta has these 3 or 4 skills that are important, but a nurse that's in South Dakota, their skills are A, B, and C that are the top 3. And it was really intriguing to be able to see the differences there, because not only do those create different ways to serve the patients in that use case, but also it creates different levels of pay, different other kinds of factors in that conversation. And having that kind of information allows an employer to be more agile, to be more able to respond to challenging conditions that we've all been facing more quickly, because they can say, hey, we need this skill, and we're either going to hire for that, we're going to develop that, we're going to find a way to get that gap filled, because otherwise there's a cost to that. There's a study that Career Builder did a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, but they were looking at companies across the United States, and one of the things that they arrived at was the cost of a skills gap for the average company is shy of $1 million, but not much shy of that, because it's costing you, not just in terms of we're not able to serve as many customers as we need to be able to serve right now, but also because the people in the business are also bearing the weight of that. If Heather and I are on a team and we're missing 3 other people on the team because of gaps that we have in the skills in the organization, well, Heather and I are going to be increasingly more burned out, less productive, right? More likely to call in sick, because those things start to mount on the other people that are around there. So there's a lot of different costs that kind of factor into that. So it's not just that skills thing is something important. We'll get to that eventually. There's a real cost to it today, even if you don't know it.
So Ben, let's talk a little bit about myths surrounding 50 plus folks and their sort of perceived non-interest or inability to reskill. Our research shows that that's not true at all. In fact, recent research we did during the pandemic shows that workers 50 plus, like 2/3 of workers 50 plus, are interested in learning new skills. And when they're asked about that in the context of their employer, so getting support from their employer, that number goes up to 94%. So that's almost 100% of the 50 plus workforce that says, if my employer wants me to learn a new skill and they're going to provide me the opportunity to do so, I'm going to take it. What is your research showing about interest in reskilling on the worker side of things?
So we just actually finished a study of 1,000 North American and European workers around that topic because I was very curious about it too. Obviously, the last year's brought a lot of challenges, and increasingly employers are saying, "Hey, we've got to figure out a different way to approach this, or we need to keep our people, but they're going to have to do different jobs for a little while until we get back to normal, whatever that is." And so what we saw in the data was overall, the number one thing, regardless of age, someone wants is, I want an employer that gives me chances to learn new skills and gives me experiences to learn, not just about the content they're throwing at me, not just another course, but gives me a chance to learn it in a space where I'm not going to get my hand smacked if I don't do it right. It's, hey, let's give you some coaching, let's give you some guidance. That psychological safety component is really important there. However, when we look at that age 50 and up bracket that AARP serves very well, one of the things that we saw in there is that age demographic is much more likely to say, you know what, developing skills, that's on me. I'm going to take responsibility for this. I'm not just going to expect the company to do that for me. I'm going to take some responsibility for this. They're more likely to develop skills on their own time than someone who is a younger worker. And in addition to that, so that's some positive things, some positive aspects. On the negative side, the opportunity here for employers is workers who are in that group were 2.5 more times more likely to say, I don't know if my employer realizes what my skills are as a younger worker. So they said, we're willing to do this. I'm willing to put forth the effort. I'm willing to try. However, it's a give and take. I don't know if my employer actually is aware of what I can do right now and is able to take advantage of that in the current space. We always talk about engagement and make people excited about work. How excited would you be if you said, I don't know if my company knows or really cares what my skills are right now? That's a tough place to be in. So I think employers really need to take the time to focus on this whole conversation around skilling. The biggest stakeholder is your people. They're the ones serving your customers on the front lines. They're the ones taking care of your clients. And if you don't focus on this, then you're missing a chance to bring out the best that they have to offer.
Absolutely. Do you hear anything about, you talked about engagement, which is one sort of soft metric. Do you hear anything about the ROI of reskilling as opposed to hiring somebody new?
So the research we've done and the research that I've seen from other organizations says that the biggest thing, if you're making that decision between let's skill someone up that's in our business or let's hire someone from outside, the biggest thing there is the cost. It costs much less to do that for someone who's inside already than it does to go out there and hire someone brand new off the street. Depending on the number that you want to use, it can cost 20, 30, 50% or multiples of someone's job, depending on how specialized it is. But taking the time and the effort and the interest to reskill someone can cost just a fraction of that. And so there's definitely, the biggest one there in terms of ROI is definitely the cost of that. We've also seen in our research that employers say it's just less risky overall. And if companies are thinking about the challenges ahead and creating a more stable environment, eliminating risk is a big part of that. So if we are trying to make a choice between two different options here, and the one is it's less risky, it's perceived as a safer bet, it's not just you're giving something away, you're actually getting the best of multiple worlds. Because there's research that shows that research from the University of Wharton, Pennsylvania, says when you hire someone from outside instead of someone inside, on average, it costs you up to 20% more, and they perform worse on the job on average for the first 2 years. You're paying more for someone that performed worse, and you ignored that person that was excited to take that opportunity. You stepped over them to find this other person, and they might end up leaving. That happens a lot because someone feels like there's not an opportunity there. So there's so many different facets of this, and there's a lot of evidence, not just our feelings, not just our perceptions. There's a lot of evidence that says reskilling people, developing them internally, looking for mobility opportunities to move people into other slots, that leads to a lot of really great outcomes that every organization want to benefit from.
Yeah, that's so good to know too, because I think it must be a relief to companies to say, we've got this great talented workforce, but they're not exactly skilled in where we need to go. And so rather than, chucking all of those folks and hiring a bunch of new people, start to think seriously about reskilling and really talking to your people and saying, where do you want to go? We've got these different options of skill paths. So, yeah.
It's not even like you're trying to sell them something they don't want. Hey, I've got a timeshare for you. Let's sell it. No, they actually want to do this. They said resoundingly they've said in the research, and I've seen this in every study that I've seen over the last few years, people want development opportunities. But in our research specifically, again, it came back to, I want new skills, I want experiences. I'm asking for that. They crave that. And they're just waiting for their employer to say, okay, right, we've got this opportunity for you, here you go. If you miss that chance though, and that story you said, that example you gave where it's, let's just move them on and find someone else. Let's find someone who does have those abilities and just that'd be easier for us. There's a lot of cost wrapped into that, not just in hiring of people, but in the sense of connectedness, the morale, if you want to call it that, inside the workforce, the people who stick around. GE had a really great story recently where they had this group of workers who were older and more experienced. They were experiencing these legacy technologies that they weren't supporting very much anymore. And they came to this decision point where, okay, we've got to decide, do we keep this business unit and reskill them, or do we move them on and just try to hire to backfill all these new roles we're hiring for? And they put that group through an intensive training program, develop new skills for that group of people. So they all come out of that, not just with a shiny certificate, but with this renewed hope for the future. And again, I'm a researcher. I love numbers and data and things, but it's really hard to argue with someone being excited and hopeful about the path that you've laid out for them, saying, I didn't just care enough about you to hire you once, care enough about you to hire you again by giving you this opportunity to grow with us. That's a really, really powerful place to be. And again, there's not an employee out there that wouldn't say, absolutely, I want that.
Yeah, and it's a powerful brand story to tell to future candidates. Absolutely. So we hear and see all the time on research and surveys, if it's PwC, if it's World Economic Forum, if it's McKinsey, that soft skills are rising in importance. In fact, the Future of Jobs report that came out last year from the World Economic Forum cited the top 15 skills for 2025. And of those 15 skills, only 3 are what I would call purely technical. There are things like reasoning and critical thinking. There's things like resilience. There's things like creativity. There's things like self-regulation. Really interesting new skills that they're not really new, but they're new, I think, in terms of the focus from organizations on a skill they want to hire for. And yet on the flip side, I know from talking to employers and hearing from other experts that employers will say this. They'll say, we really need these soft skills, but they don't really know how to define them or how to specifically pinpoint how that turns into a competency on a specific job that they're trying to fill. So what are you hearing about that struggle? Because we're in a new way of thinking, right? We're in a kind of skills-based labor market, or we're moving toward that. And that is a big shift. It's a big shift away from looking at someone's academic credentials versus someone's skill credentials. So what are you hearing about that struggle to define those soft skills and where employers are looking for them?
It's a tremendous question, Heather. And there's a couple things I'll touch on there. Number one, in our new research on hiring, employers in the last year have gone deeper into assessments than they ever have before as a tool to help them understand and measure those kinds of things. Because if I'm interviewing you and we're doing an in-person interview, which seems strange to say these days, we're doing an in-person interview, and I'm trying to get a feel for how resilient you might be or how creative you might be. It's really hard to gauge those things, and I'm inherently biased in what I'm seeing. Right? If I like you, I'm going to say, oh, Heather is absolutely creative. If I'm not getting a good vibe from you, or I don't feel like we're connecting, Heather's not really collaborative. She's not really a good team player. Right? And so that's the challenge of just doing it the way we've always done it. So increasingly, assessments are becoming this objective way to measure that. The other thing I want to say is some of those skills, it's fun. I was listening to you share those out, and a couple of those really resonate with me because I don't just call them soft skills, I call them human skills. In the world of automation and all the kinds of disruption that technology is bringing, one of the big focal points of the book that I wrote on AI for HR is around how these human skills of work are going to become an increasingly important part of what we do, not just because an algorithm can't do them, because they can't, not to the same degree we can, but also because if we are automating pieces of work over time, every little bit that gets automated, what's left are those human skills. So those are not just important now, not important a year ago, but increasingly important over time. There's an exponential, like compound interest of the value of those. And the human skills that I wrote about in the book that I think are kind of the core ones, again, that an algorithm can't replace, the ones that are increasingly important for employers to be looking for and thinking about: creativity, compassion, being able to care for someone else. And again, we've seen that in the last year, especially. Critical thinking, working through problems, collaboration, and curiosity, asking questions. being willing to dive into things. And again, that's one of the fun things that I saw in the research around skill development, especially for workers that are over age 50, because they said, hey, I'm not done. I still want to learn. I still want to grow. I am very curious about how these things work. And if you'll give me a chance, I'd like to exercise that curiosity by developing a new skill and then putting it to work. So it's a fun intersection of all those things we talked about today. I think that those human skills are not just the frontier of what's next in the workplace, but it's also this opportunity for people to show where they really shine and demonstrate that.
Right. And, I also read a lot of research across, again, this emerged as a finding during the pandemic across a bunch of different unconnected research reports that older workers had a better time adjusting to remote work than younger workers did. There are probably a lot of reasons for this. They probably don't have young children at home. We've just been talking about our children, but they also have developed coping skills over time. There's just there's something to be said for gaining experience in your life over time. And so older workers do have a lot of those human skills that we're talking about and that are developed on the job.
Yes, that again, the way I see that reflected in some of the data that we've gathered, not completely, right? Because there's a couple different layers to that story. But one of the ways I see that is the piece I mentioned earlier, where I said, if you've been in the workforce for just a few years, there's nothing wrong with that. However, you are more likely to think that someone else is going to tell you what the next skill is you need to learn. They're going to tell you what that career path is that you need. Whereas someone who's been around in the workforce for a longer period of time knows that they've got to take some ownership over that. They've got to take some responsibility of that. Are there other factors? Absolutely. That shouldn't ever be just on someone's shoulders to try to guess and figure out what's important. However, they're more likely to say, hey, I'm ready to step up and take it. I just need some indication, some direction, and I will go. I will march. I will take that on. And that's one of the exciting things there, because as you were saying, like they're able to adapt, they're able to change because they've had those experiences. And sometimes we want to ignore the value of someone's experiences and the life they've lived and what they've done. And I think that's a mistake, because they're missing a chance to really reap the benefits of those things they've learned. The funny way that I say this to my kids is everything that I've done right, I did wrong the first time. And so those people had a chance to do more things wrong the first time and learn from that.
Great. Well, thank you, Ben. It's always such a pleasure talking to you. I'm sure we'll talk again. I really appreciate you bringing your expertise to bear on this topic, and we will continue the conversation. So thanks again for joining me.
Yes, ma'am.